Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States. I am here with my good friend Grant Turner, who I believe is in an airport with an awesome backdrop. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing good, brother. Just life on the road, my friend.
Yeah, you're as good as it gets. I had a trip canceled this weekend, so I'm actually going to be home for like a month. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself, not racking up airline and hotel miles. So Mark is not with us this morning. We'll talk about that later. Me and GT, you and I were talking off air. There's just a truckload of stuff to get into. But let's start out with the national duels. You were obviously there, and let's start with you guys. Grandview wrestled fantastic. I mean, you texted me the statistics, but I think you guys might have lost, I don't want to misquote it, somewhere between 2 and 4 individual matches for the whole weekend. Is that correct?
Yeah, we went 37-3 on the weekend.
Well, I think people might say you guys are used to winning, and that's certainly the case, but you did lose the final last year. So I would imagine that this meant a little more to you this year. It's if there's even 1% of your brains that took winning that tournament for granted, this one had to be a little sweeter, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think anytime that once again, this is a new team, this is a new group. It's the same thing with everybody else in the nation. So it's a really cool event where we get to see a lot of the different schools, and we hadn't had a chance to wrestle Southern Oregon in a duel in a while. Which was great to see, and bringing everybody together. I think the NAI loves it. I think also if you look at the other divisions, finally we got the Division I teams back in this event. I spoke to many of the Division I coaches, and they enjoy it because once again it's dual meets. It's everybody gets matches, and they're all part of their ranking series, being able to match up with people. But it was great, and once again, I'd heard a whole bunch of different interviews. One particular being Doug Schwab from Northern Iowa about how it's not necessarily a mid-major, national duels is what they were kind of calling it. It was like, no, these are all really really stinking good teams. With really, I mean, some of these guys are ranked number 1 in the nation that were at this tournament. So
yeah,
I think also for the Division II, Division III. Once again, once you get into not to get into the debate on traditional versus dual meet titles, but the passion of duels and everything coming down to certain matches and heavyweights, going out there and launching a dude for a pin to win the duel it's pretty crazy. It's really fun to watch, and the stars were out at all the other divisions. The women's Division I was there. The NAI came down to life winning that, and there's just some really really good wrestling going on all across the board. There were 32 mats, I believe, down in the dome.
Yeah,
and I mean they were staggering people out. It was wall to wall. It was great to see.
Well, historically, so people understand, that's the old Fargo. When I wrestled, that's where junior nationals was at Northern Iowa. So it's in the Uni Dome, which is a setup very similar to Fargo for people that have only been to one and not the other. We wrestled in that. Merrimack wrestled in that back when it was all those different ones like you're talking about. And it's very cool. I think the last year we wrestled in it, we took second. But it's very cool to be alongside these other teams from other divisions, especially when you're a JUCO guy, because it's, you're the 2-year, you're the little brother of all of it. So it's great. You could look at the brackets and you saw they had it designed, even if you went 0-2, then you went into the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th place bracket. So you got 4 matches total. So it was really well thought out. Hey, if a team comes and they know they can't compete with a St. Cloud State or a Grandview or a Wartburg or an Augsburg, you're still going to get 4 matches for your kids. And I think that's great. And I want to say this, because somebody who's ran events and has had a bunch of coaches over the years not keep their word. Shout out to all the coaches that brought their teams and showed up, because dual meet tournaments are harder to run in one sense. You got to have the right number of teams. You can't just have a pigtail or a bye. So it was fascinating to watch. As obviously I'm friends with you, I'm friends with Omi, and so I thought it might get out of hand. I didn't think it was going to get that out of hand that fast. So, please give my congratulations to Nick and the rest of those guys up there. I think I'll actually see a bunch of them next month when I'm with you at the Iowa State tournament and then the Oklahoma State Iowa duel. So, but shout out to St. Cloud State and to you guys, Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa's on a roll, bro. They're like up to number 7 in the dual meet rankings. And I'm not sure they can beat, I don't think they can beat Penn State, Iowa, or Oklahoma State, but I'm not sure there's anybody else they can't beat in a duel.
They got a really good group. I mean, from top to bottom, and they had, once again, they upset Nebraska like a couple of weeks ago, or about maybe a week ago or something.
It's a week ago. Yeah.
But I mean, like, I think they're finally getting a little bit more healthy. Like, Robucho is healthy. Some of the freshman kids are coming out and wrestling really well. Jared Sima is having a sneaky, really good year. Just upset Cade DeVos.
Yeah.
In the duel against SDSU, and SDSU was out at the national duels as well. UPenn was there. Little Rock was there. Drexel was there. Cal Poly came all the way out. It was really good. It was very well done. Once again, I think I would have to default to two of the greatest sports journalists in wrestling, Andy Hamilton and Kyle Klingman, on how many times Wartburg and Augsburg have wrestled for the national dual title.
Yeah.
But they both upset different teams in the Division III. It came down to basically heavyweight between Johnson and Wales and Wartburg, and then also UW La Crosse was, I think, the number 1 seed, and Augsburg upset them. So it was, once again, you would have wrestling overload while watching all of these. There's 30 mats going live, and you can't keep up with all of it.
It's probably something, it's something like people like my parents who are just real fans of just wrestling, of great wrestling, and they don't necessarily root for the laundry, would really enjoy. I know when I took my dad to Fargo a couple years ago, like just being down on the floor, he just loved it. So, there's just a lot to absorb there, but shout out to all those teams for going. Shout out to the folks in Northern Iowa for running it, doing a great job in that facility. And that's how you make the use of a big facility, right? So you're not like just dropping one mat down there and it feels like, you're a speckle of dust in a canyon. Like it feels big. So shout out to all those guys. One team you mentioned there was Little Rock. Nasir Bailey got pinned by Zeth Romney, and he has not been picking down all year. And I didn't see if he picked down or Romney picked up, but I'm assuming he picked down at the end of a 0-0 first period, and he just got turned and pinned. And I don't know that there's a lot to say about that. Like, I mean, it's one match, right? So it's one data point. So you don't just go, okay, well, he's terrible on bottom, or Zeth Romney's the best guy in the country on top. I think those are massive overreactions. But it's something to consider. Like, he lost to Braden Davis because he didn't pick down. And so he obviously they have some struggles or concerns there. I think that's a valid statement based on the fact he hasn't gone down most of the year. And if you're Neil Ersman and company, you probably needed to do what you did, which is put him down, figure out how bad it is. And now you have to game plan. I mean, the difference is he's really good on top. So I think if he's not going to work on getting out, or it's just the hill's too steep for this year, he's got to concentrate more on top, on getting the riding time or getting to those tilts that he's so good at. You're still actively coaching. Is that how you would approach it with him, or would you look at it differently based on the limited information we have?
Well, I think there's just so many different ways for you to look at it, but I mean, it's a very, very low data point now. I mean, you're about halfway through the season, so you maybe have 50% of your actual data on like how people are wrestling. And once again, if you've been hurt or you're training differently, or if there's something else going on with you, once again, I think you got to take a look at, that's just one guy who, like, maybe he has a special skill set that you have to like maybe tailor something else to, and like everything else is working really well. I think that I was just looking up some of the results just from wrestling in general over the past week. I mean, there's a litany of upsets and people bouncing around. And I mean, I was sitting there and thinking about like all those data points on like how much they're training or they're into their the Big Ten's into their dual meet schedule. The Big 12 is going to be starting off theirs here shortly. But it's just one data point. I don't think you necessarily need to paint a ton, but you got to take a hard look at certain things that wrestlers are doing. And if you're having issues with it, you don't want to have it expound into the next month. So it's like you might want to like address it, fix it, and move on. But I don't think it's anything that you have to like change a ton of.
It does, I think, change the viewpoint of us from the outside on his ability to be a national title threat, right? Like you have to have no obvious weakness in any of the three positions, right? Like, and if you have an obvious weakness, it has to be on top. With the 3-point takedown now, like if you can't ride, it's almost okay if you can just get a takedown because, I can get away twice and something else has to happen. And if you're better than me on your feet, you're still going to win the match. But you can't really have a major weakness on your feet. You'll get eaten alive. And you can't really have a major weakness on bottom anymore unless you're, like we said, super competent on your feet. So I think it's something as we get into these contests and all this other stuff and people are putting their lineups together, Nasir Bailey will be an interesting guy. He's, and Seth Romney, by the way, that dude is having himself a season. Me and Mark were Googling it or WrestleStatting it yesterday. He's something in one and has some quality wins. He's beaten Ayala and he's beaten Bailey. So he'll have to wrestle Bailey again for the Pac-12 title. But if he does, he's going to be a top 4 seed at NCAAs if he runs the table out. And from a guy that went 0-2 at Natty's last year to this, that's a major, major step up. So it's good to see those guys, like Cerritos and Chewy and those guys developing guys like that. And those are good. Those are great stories, so it's exciting to watch those guys develop stories from non-traditional schools. I think that's good for the average fan, like to bring more people in. Obviously, California's got great high school wrestling. All you got to do is look at the Doc B tournament. So more people that are thriving at other non-traditional schools are really good. So I talked to you off air. There's just so many sort of disjointed things that happened this week. But let's start out with Flo has an article up and they titled it Another Avalanche of Upsets in Week 11. So just going to kind of point out some things. Jason Chrysler beat Patty Gallagher. That's interesting because that's a 157. And now Sasso may end up going down there. Minto beat Sparks. That decided the duel, basically, and we'll get into our picks there. Shoemate beat Bronigal. Julian Tagg beat Composto. Ethan Burden, the true freshman Grant from Ohio State, beat Braden Scholes. Farber, a Northern Iowa guy, beat Serrano. Strickenberger beat Tyson Terrakina. Michael Wilson beat MJ Gaitan. Shane Cartino Walsh beat Ryder Rogatsky. We'll talk about that duel. We'll talk about this next duel as well. Spencer Moore from North Carolina beat number 4 Eddie Ventresca. 125 is feeling a lot like 125 again, except at the very top. I mean, and when I say very top, because we had another interesting result last night. Gallagher beat Tanner Jordan. Cartella from Northwestern beat Cannon Webster. And Cannon Webster had lost earlier to D'Amelio, so it was a tough weekend for him. This is not an upset except in the rankings. Pinheiro beat Sammy Alvarez. And Luke Nichter beat Jude Swisher. I'm not going to read all these, but see. Alex Kramer beat Cade DeVos. That's a big one. Trying to see else of anybody like any other top 10 guys. Jacob Van D beat Tyler Wells. Sima, you mentioned, beat DeVos 6-5. Dylan Shaver beat Nick Bazakis. I don't know if it's an upset, but I mean, Dylan Shaver won the Big Tens last year, so kind of hard to say we're surprised by those. Dean Peterson beat Brendan McCrone. I feel like that's kind of K. DeVos beat Incontrera, but again, that was 7/5, and the 7 guy's awfully freaking good. So, of any of those, and Jackson Arrington beat Sammy Sasso. Arrington's redshirting, this year. Of all those I just read off, is there one or two that sticks out to you that's either surprising or like, hey, this guy's really coming, or just maybe like a thought or two on that whole list?
Well, I think for me, probably Cade DeVos is probably the most, because he's had 2 losses there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he was preseason ranked. He was in the All-Star Classic to start the year. Someone that's kind of been extremely highly ranked in the past couple of years for SDSU. Just seeing him as like, taking a couple, maybe some bad losses early in the season, because I think they had some pretty high hopes for him to be in the mix with the rest of those guys.
Right.
And it's just not panning out to look like that right now. But I know that, Coach Hahn and Coach Caldwell will get him ready. But yeah, I mean, once again, when you wrestle everybody in the top 20 all the time and you have a really good schedule and you're wrestling all those guys, you're going to have some losses. I mean,
yeah.
So, but that's one guy that I think that if I were looking at it, he's in that second shelf right behind, the O'Toole, Haynes,
Hamity.
Yeah. Group.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's go to our picks for the Minnesota-Nebraska duel. So it was very interesting. Mark got 10 of he got 6 picks exactly right, 2 picks that were right, but different margin, and then one that didn't happen, and one wrong. You went 4-4-1-1, and I went 5-3-1-1. So, I mean, I guess in honor of Mark not being here, we'll say we owe him wings this week. But it was an interesting duel, GT. Like, I'm going to pull up the box score. It was 21-13 Nebraska, and I'm going to start at 25. They started the duel at 57, but Minnesota, Nebraska won those 4 weights, the bottom 4 weights. The duel was the opposite. They start, so Caleb Smith beats Flynn, Van D beats Wells, Hardy beats Vombar, Lovett beats Roberts, Taylor beats Askey, Minto beats Sparks, and at that point they're up 18-0, or sorry, 21-0, and so or 18-0, and then Pinto beats Whiting, and then the duel's over. And so it's really interesting. Like, if they had started this duel at 84, and Max McAnally is a real problem, GT. Like, I don't know if we're sleeping on this dude, but he is undefeated. He beat Silas Allred 16-6. Salazar measures McDaniel. Gable does Gable things with a tech fall. But Max McAnally is now sort of knocking on the door. Let me ask. I don't know we can put him in the Starachi Kekheisen level. I don't know if we can put him in the Plot level, though Plot had a good close match last night with Fishback. I mean, he scored late. Oklahoma State's scoring a lot of points late, by the way. They're scoring last, and they're scoring big. Caleb Fish was in a 5-5 match and scored 7 at the end, so it looks like he almost majored him, and he did almost major him. He also almost lost. McAnally, sneaky good, like really sneaky good. He was a good recruit coming out of high school, like a really good recruit, but he wasn't I expect this dude to be, he wasn't Angelo Ferrari. Like, if Angelo Ferrari was ranked 4th in the country at this stage next year, you wouldn't be surprised. You might think it's low based on who's graduating. So Max McAnally is a major piece, and we talked about this earlier in terms of Minnesota's team rankings, that him and the return of Gable Stevenson bumps them a ton. I assume we kind of have the same reaction, Minnesota losing this duel. kind of like we did with Nebraska last week with UNI, like tip of the cap to UNI. Nebraska's a good team and they'll bounce back. Is that kind of how you see this?
Yeah, I think it's I talked to many of the people like from Nebraska after they lost to the UNI duel, and it's like UNI is just wrestling really hot right now, and they everything went well for UNI to beat Nebraska that night, and I think that they just bounced back and they're just ready to go again. But I think also when you look at the Minnesota team, without, let's say, Gable and the evolution of McAnally, they were like outside of the top 20. And now, like with those guys wrestling and being like in the top 4, top 5, you look at their roster up and down, all 10 weights, I think, are ranked in the top 12 now.
Yeah.
So
just about. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they got 9 top 12ers and then like a guy in the 20s. But yeah, they're really balanced, right?
And I think that's what in duels, like duels are like a little bit like, let's say, a little bit more, they're more volatile, because if you have a stud and he goes up against a stud, but it's like that guy usually gets us 3, 4, maybe 5 if he's dominant in a dual meet format, and all of a sudden he loses that for that whole team, like it doesn't equate well to dual wins.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a blip for Minnesota, because they're going to have a ton of really good matches moving forward, and they're going to be able to beat a lot of other Big Ten teams. Which, I mean, if we look at some of the other results, they're going to beat the brakes off of a lot of different teams that are in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
That's a very nice way to put it.
No, that's an old school way to put it. That's what you caught me by surprise. Well done. Yeah. And Andrew Sparks, for example, like sometimes we give guys credit for good losses. Like he lost to Caliendo at Soldier Salute 7-6, but he loses to Minto. And it'd be interesting to see if Minto ends up being the guy. I mean, we don't know why Bubba Wilson's not wrestling, but Minto's filled in really nicely over the last, couple weeks or so. So another result, we're just going to kind of hop through these because there's a bunch of them, and then we'll get to the rankings. North Carolina beats Virginia Tech, and shout out to Rob Cole and Tony Ramos. So congratulations. No Caleb Henson, and that does change the result of the duel. Even if Lachlan McNeil wins, it changes it from a 3-point to a 1-point margin, but certainly Caleb Henson would be favored. That's an 8-point swing. But Gavin Kane pinned TJ Stewart. TJ Stewart's now 4-7. Josh Ogunsanya beat Lenny Wallach, and Spencer Moore beat Eddie Ventresca. And those are all 3 super legit wins, GT.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I think another guy that you're really high on too is Hippolito, and he beat Sonny Santiago, who's a pretty decent wrestler and represents, I believe, Puerto Rico on the world level.
Right.
That's a in conference big time win, and you winning like 14-7, like that's not even close. Like that's a very, very dominant win for Hippolito, and I think might want to do like a mental health care check on TJ Stewart, because that guy was a monster last year, and either something's going on with him that we just don't know about, but his results have been so hot and cold this year that I mean, humongous kudos to Gavin Kane for that win. And then of course I think you look at Cade Lout going to overtime with Andy Smith. That's another guy that like you would, if you're Virginia Tech, Andy Smith's, somebody that you're going to count on for points at nationals and getting on the podium.
He's in the blood round. Like, I mean, based on the rankings, he's in the blood round. So yeah. So UNC's coming, man. They look good. Probably the dual result of the weekend that was the most surprising was Maryland beats Michigan 18-18. They win on criteria. They have the only fall of the meet. And to be honest, which is kind of weird, I think there was one upset. And the upset was John Branson from Maryland beat Joseph Walker from Michigan. Joseph Walker's ranked like between 25 and 33, and Branson's not ranked. So, that's an upset. But, Maryland they won 5 matches. Braxton Brown got the fall. Cal Miller wins. Ethan Miller wins. John Branson wins. Jackson Smith wins. And they just won. And, I'm friends with Clemson. I know you're friends with Clemson. I'm friends with Sean and those guys too, and KJ like you are. So, but this is a defining moment, I think, for Maryland, right? Like, this is you can come here and win. You can come here and wrestle in big duels. We're coming. I mean, I think this is the year they got to punch some of those guys through in that recruiting class onto the podium, right? Like Braxton Brown, clearly, it's very interesting. Ethan Miller doing way better at 57 than 49. Braxton Brown doing way better at 33 than he was at 25. And Jackson Smith doing way better at 84 than 97. I did a podcast with Clemson earlier this year. We didn't put it up because there was a couple incidental bad words in it, and so we didn't post it. But they have this body composition machine that where like they can put you on there and tell you exactly like your bone density, your good fats, your bad fats, your muscles, how much muscularity you can put on. Some of that stuff's actually sort of genetically driven. And Clemson was talking about how they did the machine and it told Braxton to go up, Ethan to go up, and Jackson Smith to go down. And he had talked to me off the record last year that Jackson Smith was like 191 at Nationals. And for people that don't know, he was wrestling 197, and that should not be because, that's where big guys are pulling the most because it's like, and they're cutting their weight right because there's actually high motivation. So your thoughts on that duel or any of those kids in particular?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head. Everything that you're kind of talking about there is what I would say. I'm very happy to see the Miller brothers in the lineup and doing very well because they're very highly touted kids that, once again went there with the intention of doing what they're doing with Maryland and knowing Clemson and going up there and being able to do that. But I think if you're a Michigan fan, I mean, it's not necessarily like something that you need to worry about. But it is maybe concerning about maybe some of the depth in the room and some of those kids maybe thinking they were going into that match that it was going to be a lot easier than it was. But I think Big Ten schedule is Big Ten schedule. Now, once again, we talk about earlier how some of the teams, had some very, very difficult duels this past week as well, which I know we don't necessarily have to get into, but I mean, Wisconsin didn't win a match against Iowa.
Yeah.
Michigan State had some very, very brutal losses in their dual meet schedule.
They lost to Maryland after getting shut out. I think it was 55-0 by Penn State. Yeah.
Now, once again, I don't know. Getting Penn State team is very talented, but they could make any team look bad.
So for perspective, Penn State has lost 3 wrestling matches in duels this year. Okay, not 3 duels, 3 wrestling matches. Okay, and one of them was the Keegan O'Toole match. There was another one, I'm trying to think who they lost to, that was a super highly ranked guy, and it'll come to me. And the other one was a backup. So this team has to be in the conversation. They got to finish the job, but they might be the most dominant team ever. I mean, it's kind of stupid how good they are. So I didn't mean to take you off track. I apologize.
No, I think the statement there for some of these teams is even if you get rung up 55-0 against Penn State, yeah, it's disheartening. Yeah, that's not what you want to have happen. But there's a lot of teams out there that would go the same way at the Division I level against Penn State in a dual meet scenario. So it's not necessarily something that is noteworthy, but it's something that like we can say on the positive side for Penn State, like how dominant they are and what a team that they have for dual meets, let alone what they can do in an individual setting.
Yeah, for sure. So the other duel that really, we'll talk about this one that surprised me and then one that didn't surprise us. Ohio State beats Rutgers, but it was 17-15, 9 decisions. The only tech fall was Jesse Mendez. Peterson beats Macron. Shaver beats Bazakis. So Rutgers gets off to a good start. Ohio State then wins Mendez over Hermes. D'Amelio over Clark. Sammy Sasso over Connor Harrer. Barbosa beats Ethan Burden. Karsula beat Jackson Turley. That was there's a bunch of super close matches in here, like 4-3, 2-1 tiebreaker, 3-2, 2-1 tiebreaker, 3-2, 6-4, 5-4, and then 4-1 was Feldman with the takedown late. But Karsula beat Turley. Cardina Walsh beat Rogatsky. Poznansky beat Shoemate. And so it was 15-14 going into heavyweight. And then Feldman beat Slavikowski 4-1. As a guy that has to know tiebreakers, it would have been very interesting if somehow Mendez had a decision and it was 5-5. I think that duel comes down to match points. Because there's no penalty, there's no flagrants, there's none of that other stuff. It's 5-5. So, and what's interesting is, first of all, shout out to, here's what's tough if you're a really good team in the Big Ten, right? Like there's certain duels you go, okay, it's going to be kind of easy for us. And then you go, well, Rutgers isn't easy anymore. Well, Maryland's not easy anymore. So these teams keep getting better and better. And it just becomes, the schedule becomes more difficult, even though you have the same schedule, because these other teams are simply getting better. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. Illinois wrestled Ohio State, and that duel was, I think it was like 27-9 or something. But the last one, GT, I want to talk about, I don't know, did you watch the duel last night between Oklahoma State and North Carolina State?
Just via Twitter. I wasn't necessarily watching it live. I just was keeping up with the updates. Okay, so I would say this. It was fairly chalky the last 8 weights. Like Jamison beat Tracy, Young beat Biskins, Caleb Fish beat Ed Scott 12-5 in a match that was 5-5 with 20 seconds left. And they get in a scramble, and he wins it and gets a 7-point move. Cam Amin wins. Hamady beats Singleton 8-4. He scored late. It was a 5-4. That was a good match. Dustin Plott wins 5-0. It was 2-0. He scored late. There's a bunch of the Oklahoma State guys scored late. Cerber was winning, had a major, cuts the guy, gets a takedown, and adds riding time to get a tech. Hendrickson beat Trumbull 10-4. Trumbull made some good adjustments from Cliff Keen. The two big, I think, headline matches, Vincent Robinson beats Spratley, beats him 7-3, 2 takedowns to none, and picked down and just got out. And Cale Hughes beats Chiarini. No score first period. Cale Hughes rides Chiarini the whole second period. Arini's on top third period, almost puts Hughes on his back. Cale scrambles out, ends up on top in that snake position and just punches it through and pins him. So what's interesting here is Oklahoma State. I texted somebody. I think Cale Hughes won the spot. The rumors are, his weight has either been a problem. He was also banged up a little bit. He was wearing some sort of shoulder thing. It's also hard to make weight when you're banged up. I think we all know that. But if Oklahoma and one of us on this show picked Cale Hughes as an All-American in the preseason, by the way, and I think the other guys just forgot about him, because he wasn't listed in the rankings. It isn't like we all don't believe in Cale Hughes. But if he's a legit medal threat, that really helps Oklahoma State a ton. And I also think this. I think Vincent Robinson's a threat to win the national title. I really do. He's just hard to wrestle, man, because, you can't get in that hand fight. He's got that wrist snap. He's really fast. He can get out. He doesn't really like to ride, but he doesn't need to. So, and obviously NC State's redshirting a bunch of guys this year. So, they're going to be better next year. But your thoughts just on those results, either from listening to me or via Twitter? Well, I think, kind of we talked about a little bit of Penn State's dominance as far as a dual meet lineup. Oklahoma State's putting together one of the best dual meet teams that they've had. Even like last year, they went. I think it was like maybe they only won or lost one duel last year, maybe.
They were undefeated and lost the Iowa duel. Correct.
But I think that's a testament to like the new coaching staff as well, with a whole bunch of new guys in the lineup, even though they're like extremely talented. They're a salty group. And the way that Cale Hughes was able to like run through that scramble and then be able to get the fall like and make the most of it, that's huge. That shows those guys believe in what they're doing. And once you don't want to put too much emphasis onto one scramble in one position, but it's just how they've been wrestling all year. So, and
NC State difference. You're right. It's a big difference.
NC State's a good team. Like they are going to be a very, very hard out at the national tournament. And a lot of those athletes that are wrestling there, you're going to see I would say probably 5, 6 of them on the stand, All-Americans and for them to get what?
Boat race, 35-3.
Just beat up.
Yeah.
As a team, not individually, because all those matches, some were extremely competitive.
Yeah.
You probably take Kairini in that match 5 out of 5 times, toss-up match.
Yeah. They lost a 5-2, a 5-2, an 8-4. An 8-4 with the late takedowns, 5-4. They lost a 5-0 that was 2-0. I mean, but if you look at, like you're saying, Vincent Robinson, very good chance of being on the stand. Kairini has been on the stand. Ed Scott has been on the stand. Matt Singleton has really good wins. Dylan Fishback has really good wins. And Isaac Trumbull, I think we believe, is going to be on the stand. So to your point, like you said, 5 or 6 guys, they're a good team. They match up absolutely horribly against Oklahoma State. And the thing is, Spratly was the favorite. So, like, if you flip it and you go Oklahoma State wins the match they're favored and NC State wins the match they're favored, it's actually, just instead of 35-3, it's 32-3, because Arini wins by decision instead of used by fall. I think Oklahoma State is in the hunt to take second, depending on the health of Teamer. Because I don't think Iowa scores any points at 25 and 41 at nationals. I don't even know if they get to nationals at 25 and 41. So, and then if you add 57 and there's 3 weights where they don't score, that's a lot. Oklahoma State, Spratly's a podium contender. Cale Hughes, if you can beat Arini, is a podium contender. Tegan Jamison's ranked high. Carter Young's around a 16 guy. Caleb Fish is around a 16 guy. When I say this, just where they're ranked. And then Amin, Hamidi, Plott, Serber, Hendrickson are all ranked in the top 8. So is Jamison, and so is Spratly. So they got 7 guys ranked in the top 8. And I'll say this one more time and maybe not say it next week. Oklahoma State has the absolute misfortune of the 3 best guys being at weights that have double returning national champions. Most years, Dean Hamady would be projected to be a finalist. Dustin Plott would be projected to be a finalist, and Wyatt Hendrickson would project to be a finalist. So they're just, and they doesn't mean they can't win those matches. They're just behind some borderline legend guys. So, okay. Let's talk a little bit about injuries, GT. So Jory Volk, Wyoming 125, out for the year. He was one of 16 guys that was ranked number 1 or 2 last year. Ty Waters, a guy that we love to watch wrestle, Big 12 champion as a freshman, NCAA semifinalist, and I think he took 5th, maybe somewhere in that range at NCAAs last year from West Virginia. He's from the Whippeal. He's out for the year. And then Ryan Crookham. So I'm just going to try to report this accurately. I don't know. Pat Minio said he's out for the year. Flo said they called the Lehigh staff and said he's injured. We think we're going to get him back in time for the national qualifier. But either way, he's out for a while. So you're in a room every day and it feels like training methodologies are smarter than ever. Is this just weird luck? Is it guys get injured all the time and it's just more big names this year when you add like Rocky Elam and Teamer and some of these other guys? Or is there something in the water?
I just think that injuries happen. I'm not a big proponent of like, now if you have like a whole team of them, you know, like how I would say if everybody at Oklahoma State was like their shoulders are falling off and maybe they're overtraining. Or
like Iowa 10 years ago. We're on shoulder straps. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the amount of name brand or power names that are in the NCAA that are hurt right now, there's a lot of contenders, you know, top ranked guys. I mean, we could even go into looking at, you know, Keegan O'Toole's out for a little while. Rocky Elam's probably going to be done for a while.
He's out for the year. Keegan's out till February, supposedly.
Well, Nelson Brands is dealing with injuries pretty much the entire time. Ja'Cory Teamer, you know, these are national title contenders. These are guys that are, you know, household names that are going down, right? Not to mention that
Figueroa was out for a long time.
Yep. Biggs was out for a long time. But you just look at even like last year, you know, superhuman Carter Strachey probably shouldn't have been wrestling, still did wrestle.
And won.
So there's some superhuman type things that happen there where maybe it's enough that they can survive and still be able to wrestle and compete. Makai Lewis banged up pretty much all the time. Another guy that was a prominent name. It's just, you know, Lachlan McNeil last year having to like injury default. And I just think that injuries happen and it doesn't. And once again, I think all these kids have a bigger following. So maybe we're watching it a little bit closer now.
Yeah, that's probably fair, right? Social media's, we find out about it sooner. And as good as these coaches aren't hiding things, you know, people are finding stuff out.
Yeah. And it's a shame that, you know, injuries happen, but every year it happens.
It changes the team race and the individual races dramatically, right?
100%. And you can tell even last year, you look at, I'm just going to use Strachey again because he was, you know, national champion and dealing with an injury the entire time and everybody knew it.
Yeah.
And he still just continued to push through when you can, or you just know that someone's hurt and they're not giving you your best, or a fraction of what you can be if you're fully healthy. So
what's interesting about Penn State is they probably wrestle the lightest schedule in the country in terms of going to hard tournaments and the quantity of matches. And, you know, certainly whatever they're doing is clearly working. So it's not like anybody should go, well, they're messing up. And I think their argument is the fresher, the better. And we don't need to go wrestle a bunch of other people to get good competition. We just need to practice with each other and our senior level athletes and our coaches. And, you know, when you build an RTC like that, bless you, my friend, and when you build senior level athletes up in a coaching staff where, like, I told this story, but like John Messenbrink is a friend of mine who's the father of Mitchell. And I saw him at the Iowa Penn State duel in the hotel a year ago. And I was like, how, you know, don't give me a little peek behind the curtain. He goes, well, like Mitchell was in a match and he got rode pretty well by legs and he didn't get out. And he goes, so they just put him with Zane Rutherford for a day or two and just worked on getting out of legs. And it's like, that must be nice, right? Find the best leg guy of the last 10 years and just put him with him and carve it out. And there's faith in your athlete, right? Like you're not over there just playing around, you're getting better, but you're almost getting, it's like a one-on-one session. Well, you're getting a one-on-one session with an absolute beast in that special, he's a beast, period, but a super beast in that specialized thing you're trying to get better at. So, you know, it was really interesting to hear about that and to go, okay, well, A, that's really smart, and B, there's a lot of trust between head coach and athlete and then assistant coach and athlete, in terms of helping these guys get better. So I don't know what the answer is. Wrestling's a hard sport. It's kind of like if you play fantasy football, you can have a team where literally every single guy on your team went down with injuries like mine this year. And it's just, in a certain sense, it's luck of the draw. Like, there's a lot of it, there's no rhyme or reason to it. So we did mention Figueroa. So he's back, GT, and there was a lot of speculation that he was going to stay out for the year and then hit the portal, and certainly he could still hit the portal. But he was pretty vocal when the Arizona State guys left, when Parco and Teamer left. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the offseason. But 125 gets a lot more interesting with Richie Figueroa in it. You add the dominant season Matt Ramos has had so far. You add the upside, the ceiling of Vincent Robinson, and you add the steady world-class level, and I will say world-class level, of Luke Lillidow, who made an age group world final 4 years in a row, and I believe is the only men's age group athlete to ever do that. He went 2-2 in those gold medal matches. And there's certainly other guys there, but I feel like those guys are kind of the headline at 125.
I would agree.
So, the next set of guys down are guys that are good, but like Caleb Smith, Spratley, he's good, but, he hasn't placed at nationals yet. So he had a chance last night to sort of cement himself in that top 3 seeds. And, they had put people ahead of Figs because he wasn't wrestling. And that's a ranker's quandary, which, we talk about, Mark and I talk about it more. So, all right, let me just pull up the rankings here and we'll pull this up. So another week where like the rankings came out at different times. So we're going to kind of focus on the Flow one, which came out earlier. So they bumped Vincent Robinson up to 3, and then Peterson bumped up to 10 or 9 above Renneria. So Ventresca dropped from he dropped to 5, or dropped from 5 down to 8. So at 133, Crookham stays number 1. Lucas Bird had an overtime match with Bouzakis, who then lost another match. Shawver moves up. Arini moves down. It's going to be interesting to see if they start ranking Cale Hughes, because he has a very small body of work. Carter McGonigal hasn't wrestled him forever, so that's another reason why that duel went the way it did. Zeth Romney is number 4, and he lost to Tyler Knox, and Tyler Knox has beaten Ayala and Romney. And Mark and I were talking, and he's like, well, Tyler Knox will wrestle Romney at the Pac-12s. And like, no, Sanford's out in the ACC now. So, it'll be interesting to see. Nasir Bailey, is down to 8. 41, not a lot of change at the top here. 49, Dylan D'Amelio moves up. He beat Cannon Webster. So Carter Young moves up. Rio Budo, as you mentioned, is healthy, so that's a good thing. 57. Not a lot. So the interesting thing one is here, and I don't know that we have time to talk about it today, but what is Ohio State going to do with Sasso and Patty Gallagher? And then Ethan Burden is wrestling as a true freshman at 65, but he has 5 dates, and he hasn't used them all up yet. So we'll see what happens there. But, they have first world problems. 65, Cam Steed has moved up, and he's not wrestling. Nick Ruiz moves up. Andrew Sparks falls after a loss. Tyler Lillard's moving up. Brandon Scholes took a loss. Minto is in the rankings which is interesting, at least in one source, and I'm guessing Bubba Wilson is probably ranked somewhere too. So I'm not going to call Mark Manning an ass, but it'll be interesting to see what they do there. 74, not a lot of movement. Alex Kramer moves up or into the rankings. Simon Ruiz. I've watched Simon Ruiz wrestle 2 or 3 times from Cornell. He's a freshman, dude. He's pretty freaking good. Matt Singleton, this kind of shows you the depth. Matt Singleton was in a 1 takedown match with Hamady, who's a dominant number 3, and Singleton's down in the 18 range. 184, no changes at all to speak of. 197, no changes to speak of. And 285. This is really interesting. It feels, the tiers here, and we'll see I think Bastida is the big one on like who wrestles or if he wrestles, because it changes a lot. Like as good as Kirkfleet and Hendrickson are, GT, you just don't want to be the 4 seed because you don't want to be on the same side of the bracket as Gable Stevenson, right?
Yeah, I would not want that.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're coaching realistically, you're like, hey, it's tough. You'd rather be the 6 or 7 and have to go through Kirkfleet and Hendrickson than be the 4 or 5 and have to go through who the other 4 or 5 guy is and then have to go through Gable, because you're not going to go through Gable unless something like all-time upset happens. So, and then if we go to the team scores, I'm not going to put us back on screen here, but Penn State 143, Iowa 92, Oklahoma State's up to 85. Now, I don't know if these team scores take into account Spratley, because he probably only drops a little bit. They're clearly over Minnesota. And here's the interesting: Minnesota's above Nebraska, and Nebraska's above Northern Iowa, and Minnesota lost to Nebraska, who lost to Northern Iowa. But that's the difference between individual rankings and dual meet rankings. So I think most people who watch our podcast understand that, but they're starting to feel like these tiers are separating a little bit. Grant, it feels like Penn State's tier 1, Iowa and Oklahoma State's a clearly defined tier 2. That might be the duel of the year in terms of who both sides could actually win it. And it kind of feels like Minnesota and Nebraska are pulling away a little bit in tier 3. Is that how you see it? Or do you still feel like, because there's only 2 teams in the 40s and then it drops way down. Iowa State's been banged up by injuries, and Virginia Tech has underperformed their preseason rankings so far.
I think that basically everything after, I would say probably Penn State, Iowa, Oklahoma State, Minnesota, because I think Minnesota can do, like, I think they're pretty much locked in with like some big points with Gable, and then just hope for the best after that.
Yep.
I think it's the same thing with Northern Iowa. Like, you're going to get Parker Keckeisen probably in the finals, and then you got to see what the rest of the team does.
Yeah.
So I think whatever it is, 4 through, I'd say probably 14. It's all going to depend on the round of 12, and I would say the others, because all those teams have somebody that's dominant enough. So if you have all of these teams, Minnesota's got Gable, Nebraska's got, a ton of guys that could potentially be there. I mean, I think bona fide hitter, Jesse Mendez.
Yes.
Parker Keckeisen. I think for Iowa State, I think they're a team of probably 4 or 5 guys get 4th.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech, they have Caleb Henson. I think you get after that, I think some of the individuals that I'm kind of seeing in general, Missouri, you got Keegan O'Toole in there. Purdue has Matt Ramos.
Yeah.
We just talked about NC State having maybe 6 guys that are on the stand. Lehigh's got Crookham. All these teams have kind of a bona fide hitter that's just will get them points that will separate the tiers. And it'll just be the rest of the team. Not to say that one guy's carrying the teams, but I'm just using one person as an example.
Yeah.
But the points are going to come from that round of 12 group. You got guys that are ranked 8th. They got to get 8th in order for them to continue to separate, right?
Yeah. And conversely, if you have some guys ranked 9 through 12 and they can win that blood round match, that changes things as well. So you have both sides of that coin, right, GT? Like, I mean, you obviously still coach. You guys have had big margins of victory, but in tournaments when they're close, like if you and me are wrestling in the blood round, it's not like, hey, one of us is going to not place and the other one's going to take 8th. One of us can go make a run and take 3rd with 2 pins. And so it's a big difference between stopping and scoring versus getting those 3rd place placement points, which are 10, plus the advancement, plus the possible bonus. And those are massive matches. And I feel like part of our job is to educate people too. What people need to understand, and I think when you think about it, it makes sense. If the top 4 seeds hold, only 4 guys make the semifinals. Everybody else has to win at least one match on the backside to place. So you could be the 5 and I could be the 12, and you might beat me on the front side round 2, and then you lose to the 4. Maybe you wrestle the 11 on the back. Maybe that's, the lowest ranked guy. You still got to wrestle a top 12 guy after you've lost, and he's coming off a win to place. And that's how the tournament works. So it's just really important for people to understand that. Just to give people the schedule for this weekend. So Illinois wrestles Iowa on Friday night. I think that's kind of an interesting duel. If we go, I'll just look at that real quick and see. I think at the beginning of the year, Illinois felt like they could win that duel when they had Adesanya, but right now they're favored on paper at Lucasburg over Drake Ayala, but that's 2/3. Pacino over Ryder Block, that's 16/23. And Luke Luffman is 10/Keeter 15. I think if people were betting, you might pick Ayala and you might pick Keeter. So that duel could get super ugly. Edmund Ruth, Gabe Arnold's a match I think a lot of people would want to see. You just want to see a fist fight inside of a phone booth. Watch Danny Brown go wrestle Patrick Kennedy. I think that's an interesting match. Cannon Webster's coming off a bad week, so it'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back against Parco. And they have Kraser ranked against Ja'Cory Teamer, but if Teamer doesn't wrestle, then they can certainly win that match. So if they won the 3 they were ranked and then Kraser, they could get to 4. They'd have to pull an upset to get another one, and it still feels like Iowa would have good bonus situation. The other duels, Northern Iowa, wrestles Arizona State. Not a ton of individual matchups there that really hit. Figueroa and Schultz kind of miss Northern Iowa's strength. And then Penn State, Nebraska is Friday. We'll come back to that. Saturday, there's only 6 duels. Michigan wrestles Minnesota on Sunday. So we'll talk quickly about Penn State, Nebraska. And then I want to sign off with something important. Penn State, Nebraska, kind of bonkers. Me and Mark looked at this. Penn State's favored at 9 of the 10 weights, but it's like Braden Davis over Van D, 7-13, Bartlett Hardy, 3-6, Van Ness, Ridge Lovett. That's, I think, the 2 matches I'm really interested in seeing. GT or Van Ness, Ridge Lovett, Tyler Kasich, Antrell Taylor, and then Luke Lillidow, Caleb Smith to pick 3 matches. I think those matches are awfully interesting, right?
Yeah, I like all 3 of those matchups.
Yeah. So, finally, Mark is not with us this week. His father passed, and it's Mark and I just talked for an hour and a half yesterday about really everything, partly his relationship with his dad. He sent me a video that was awesome. He talked to me about all the people that reached out. GT, I know how close you are to your dad. I think most people know how close I am to my mom and dad. And I don't want to be overly corny. I think people use the word love way too often when they don't really mean it. But Mark did get to say goodbye to his father. And I'm sure Mark will talk about this more next week, but I want him to see this and know that, and we texted privately in our group chat. because it happened while you were at National Duels, and for you to take the time and be a part of that is awesome. Just tell Mark how you feel, and I think most people that watch our podcast know, like, the three of us are genuinely good friends, and even if we vehemently disagree on something, it's never the disagreement is not more important than the relationship. So we love Mark. His dad was a big supporter of what we do. And, Mark's kind of on social media. He's got a Twitter. He just got an Instagram. Doesn't have a Facebook. But if anybody wants to send well wishes to Mark, they can certainly ping him, or, if they ping me, I'll forward those messages to him. But our thoughts and prayers are with the Ostrander family as they go through this week. And we lost a great man who is a big supporter of wrestling and of what we do. So we wanted to publicly thank him. There's really no other way to pivot. We appreciate you guys watching and listening. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you all next week.